Welcome to the GOTO podcast. Each episode covers the brightest and boldest ideas from the world's leading experts in software development. Tune in for practical lessons, compelling theories, and plenty of inspiration. GOTO gathers the brightest minds in the software community to help developers tackle projects today, plan for tomorrow, and create a better future. Stay up to date with the latest in tech through GOTO's top-rated events in cities like Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen, and Chicago, and by subscribing to the GOTO Conference's YouTube channel, where you can find thousands more high-quality dev talks. Learn more at gotopia.tech.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the fabulous GOTO Unscripted, where we get to talk to interesting people across the industry about the cool things they're building and the stuff they're working on. So I'm super happy today to be joined by Olaf. Olaf, you're from CircleCI. Tell us about Olaf and what you do in our lovely industry.
Thank you, Julian. It's great to be here. It's great that you are able to do this way. My name is Olaf Molenveld. I'm Dutchie, living in the Netherlands. And I'm active as a technology advisor at CircleCI. We got acquired with our canary releasing tool, vamp.io, about 4 years ago by CircleCI. And yeah, from that point on, I'm kind of like working within the CI/CD space as a technology advisor and basically looking ahead, seeing what's about to happen in this space and where we need to be. It's like ice hockey, right? You need to be where the puck is going instead of where the puck is right now. Although ice hockey is more like a Canadian thing and not a Dutch thing. But anyway, yeah, that's a little bit about myself. 25 something experience in the internet industry. You see my gray hair, and my beard, scar tissue all over the place.
And,
still enjoying it. yeah, but still enjoying it very much.
Cool. So, writing software is obviously one of the sort of bedrocks of our software industry, of actually writing software. And I mean, obviously today with AI and vibe coding and agents, and everything that's going wild. But getting software into production, or at least getting software in front of your customers, is the sort of, second part of it. It's awesome to write your software. If you can't get it to run anywhere, that seems a bit useless. So obviously you're at the sort of critical part of getting the software that people write safely and securely, I suppose, is the way through pipelines or things like that. So tell us about the challenges that people are having. Writing code seems to be getting much easier. I was coding with AI assistants this morning and building some awesome scripts, which just, blew my mind how productive I can be as a terrible coder. But yeah, the second step, what are you seeing out there that people are finding challenging or even finding delightful when they're trying to get their software actually out into the world?
Yeah, that's a very good point, especially in this space and this area of machine learning and AI. Effectively, why do we write software? That's an interesting question. I always like to ask like this 3 times or 5 times why. And basically, I think we write software because we want to create value for the users of the software, right? And my background, when I started, we built the first content management systems and e-commerce platforms. And one of the core things of content management systems and e-commerce platforms is that you allow non-technical people, the business, let's call it that way, to kind of do their thing with the software, right? They can create their own websites or create web pages or create product categories online. And I think it's the same when you write software. You want to have it in the hands of users. So it's like you say, you can write the most beautiful code, really awesome regular expressions that you're super proud of. And I understand this thing. I was a coder at some point, and I still do it for fun. Yeah, if nobody is using that code, or effectively the application that is making up, or the code is making up an application like a function or a feature, then what's the use, right? You design this beautiful car with the most awesome features, but there's no factory line. There's no factory that basically churns out these cars. So nobody's driving them. Nobody's enjoying the experience. And I think this getting the software in the hands of people is, you can say it's the last mile, but it's the most important mile, right? Otherwise it stays in your little computer domain and nobody's telling you it sucks or it's awesome, or if you change this a little bit, or can you change this for me because then it's even better, right? That's the feedback loop that every I think product person or software developer that has a product mindset is looking for.
Yeah, talking about the factory, and that's all about automation, which I think ties into CI/CD and all of that kind of things. And I read an interesting social media post knowing we were going to chat, and I thought that was interesting because somebody said, and I couldn't for the life of me find it, but somebody said to the effect of, CI/CD is what everybody's working on, but actually before you get to CI/CD, there are so many things you need to do beforehand because you need to have robust tests. You need to write code with tests in it. You need to have, a lot of your governance, a lot of your security, a lot of your, analysis of your code base and everything sort of all in place. And then ultimately CI/CD is the last mile, as you said, but you need to, have written your tests and build your pipelines and have done all this stuff beforehand. So when DevOps started, that was the sort of genesis of all of this of, yes, you need to have automated tests. Yes, you need to be able to have small bits of code that you can iterate over quickly, small bits of changes through your pipelines and everything. But that's a lot of work. And so where do people start? And in fact, what are people at the moment, from what you're seeing, where do they go wrong? Or where does CI/CD become difficult and complex for the last mile when they haven't done maybe the preceding stuff?
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle. So in the DevOps space or CI/CD, we always talk about moving left and shifting right. We did like the canary releasing for containers and microservices, which was typically on moving right. Like how do you get your stuff into production? Or the difference between deploying and releasing is also a very interesting one, right? Because deploying is effectively something technical, but releasing is more like opening it up to people that can start using it, and then you start getting the feedback. And
that can be a business decision of when we're going to allow something to be accessed.
Yeah, it can be like very alpha, beta stage, and then you want to understand how it's being used and if it's like up to speed or if it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. And you also have shift left. It's more like all the automated testing, like the testing period, right? The unit test, the integration test, synthetic testing, all that stuff is kind of like, but I think the reason you want to automate this, because before the DevOps in my mind is a cultural thing, right? It's developers working with ops and ops working with developers, understanding each other so they can have like the right handovers. But even before DevOps, if you want to have like this automation where you can effectively deliver software that's not broken or buggy, you want to have your tests automated, right? You change something and then you want to make sure that it's not breaking some things. And having this in a continuous loop. So you change something and then you basically look at your dashboard. I mean, in the early days, like cruise control and Jenkins. And the thing, I still remember like people were, you broke the build, and then the dashboard is now green, or wow, that's awesome, right? But You know why it was awesome? Because people would look at this thing, not I as the developer, and other people would also see like, okay, something is broken. Well, maybe I need to help, or, it's more like a collaborative thing. And I think the automation helps people to work together. And you were asking like, why is this complexity is there? I think when we start introducing more like services, microservices, or slicing up pieces of the monolith, and then all of a sudden you get this dependency that's outside of your monolithical code base. If you update this thing, how do you update your database? If you start doing monorepos, what tests do you need to run if you only touch this part of the code, right? And that complexity is effectively introducing something which I call like what we did with code, like automated testing and integration testing to make it like more dependable. We also see now happening on a layer above where you have the CI/CD or your DevOps automation. Because code is automation, right? It's like you write a program to automate things. But now we also have another layer, like a meta application that is building and testing and deploying and releasing and measuring. So you get the same challenges. If I change something in my delivery pipeline, in my factory, how do I make sure that it's not breaking something somewhere else in my ecosystem? It's becoming an ecosystem, right? It's not only the big monolith that you deploy every 3 months and then
Yes, I suppose that's still got the analogy of a factory, but in software. So you've got and modern factories, I think obviously, creating cars, for example, you do have the cars that you are creating, but the robots and the machines that are actually making those cars is another whole ecosystem itself. And that's what is the sort of care and feeding of your CI/CD system, because if your robot that is punching some piece of metal, breaks down or doesn't work, ultimately your cars don't get out. So I like that sort of dual analogy of running the factory and then what the factory produces.
It's a very interesting analogy, I think. I'm remembering there, I'm European, obviously. We had Northvolt, which was the battery producer, like a manufacturer. And I think they went bankrupt a few months ago, or at least they didn't survive. And the reason they didn't survive was interesting, because they were not able to manage the automation, the machines that basically allowed them to produce the batteries at scale. And that's the CI/CD challenge. We are in the business of building the machines that allow you to deliver your software at scale with the right quality. And the machines are a totally different area of knowledge and experience and understanding. And at Northvolt, I think there's only one, like a few Chinese companies that are able to build these machines that are able to produce these batteries at scale. And they only have the engineers that are able to configure these machines. And that's the big challenge. How can we allow companies, teams to also manage and set up their machines to create these pipelines that churn out their software in a scalable, effective way with the right quality that they require.
Yeah, because the analogies I'm thinking of, I work on serverless applications in AWS. So that is often all about microservices. It's about small little, functions or APIs or things that you're delivering. And, the analogy that I sort of I've spoken about before is, before you often had one pipeline, and I remember, looking over people's shoulders at Jenkins scripts and being like, oh my word, how on earth does that happen? One pipeline, everything goes through. But I think the modern reality today is you never have one pipeline. It can be many pipelines. Every feature branch or every little component or every little microservice can have its own pipeline that can, maybe dynamically spin up to run something and shut down. And, from a serverless side on AWS, that's great because you want everything dynamic and you only want to pay for things you maybe use and have this sort of dynamic creation of your pipeline. So how do you see about that? How does CircleCI fit into that? I'm also thinking about, how do you even codify these pipelines? Because ultimately that's software. Ultimately it's instructions. There used to be Jenkins scripts, but it's evolved from now on. So tell us the sort of state of play of, what that looks like. Lots of different pipelines and how they are actually represented in code or infrastructure or this blurring of code, infrastructure and pipelines.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think those are two very interesting topics. So let me see if I can remember those things. So the first thing, initially, of course, and also with CircleCI, we were kind of very much mapped to the VCS, the Git repo. So you do a pull request, a merge, whatever. And then, that triggers something, a build, right? It starts testing things. And it's really focused on the code and the VCS system. But right now, anything can trigger a pipeline. Maybe like a Docker update somewhere, an S3 bucket that has changed, your machine learning algorithm, a new model that you want to kind of apply. So that's something that we within CircleCI very much are focused on. We basically say anything should be able to trigger a pipeline. And a pipeline can be anything. It doesn't need to be kicking off like integration tests or unit tests. It can be basically doing a security scan and then pushing a new container to some kind of container registry. And then maybe that push can trigger another pipeline that does something else. So you get this chain of things, which are, again, it's like microservices and event sourcing and all that stuff that basically it's doing the same kind of things. Yeah, but that's a challenge and an interesting one. How do you keep track of how all these things, these pipelines interact with each other? And then it's like, okay, the same thing, like why did my build break? it's like, why did my pipeline break? So I'm expecting something happening here, and why didn't it happen? Or maybe because something else in the pipeline and this is also, and then we get to the second part of things. When we started in the CI/CD space, people were writing their own scripts, right? Bash scripts and Jenkins, you have these exploded groovy scripts that everybody loves to hate. And then at some point we kind of like, it's hard to maintain, right? It's hard to understand what's happening. And the same thing with software. If somebody else needs to take over or needs to like manage this thing, it's better to maybe have a more structured way of defining what's happening. And we went kind of from code or codified pipelines to more descriptive DSL-based deterministic pipelines, which is JSON and YAML-based pipelines. And then somebody wrote an analogy somewhere, said like, this is more like reading a book. You read from top to bottom, and it's easy to understand and also easier to maintain. And now, lately, with the increasing complexity of CI/CD and DevOps, you see again this move like, yeah, but I want to codify like CI as code, because then I can create tests and I can do all this automation that I want to do. So we kind of like move back to where we came from. But at the other hand, we also have all these like abstractions and native functionalities that we want to provide to people building the machinery, the pipelines. What I'm kind of seeing is that it's typically, again, as always, it's gray. It's not black and white. It's like combinations where maybe you use the CI/CD tool like CircleCI as the orchestrator, and with the dashboards and the APIs and the usage insights. But then you do the logic of your pipeline or your workflow, maybe in Dagger or as a bash script or, NX. Like CircleCI also has dynamic workflows. We have TypeScript-based SDK that you can use to create dynamic pipelines. So you kind of see that it's kind of being mixed to kind of manage the complexities. And debugging the pipelines becomes much more important. And I think that's also where mature CI/CD systems can create value, like SSH into the box, tracing, telling you why things are not working as expected. So tracing back, maybe step tracing through your pipeline. All these things that we did with software before, we started to move up the stack.
So that was an interesting thing you brought up of having, different software that maybe generates and runs your pipeline. You mentioned Dagger, that seems super interesting as running your pipeline as a sort of, compiled object kind of thing as code. So do these different ways of generating your pipeline, is CircleCI then able to have visibility over all of these? And is that what the sort of value you bring, that you have this observability and this sort of operational overview of, multiple different ways you may be running your pipelines sort of one level below?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that has to do with how deep you want to integrate with those tools. I mean, one of the things that we kind of like where we're struggling is like a negative word, but like finding our ways is, for example, the deploy and release story, which is kind of like what happens after the software is successfully built. For example, we have an agent that you're installing in your Kubernetes cluster. And you can use it to kind of like deploy your stuff into a Kubernetes cluster. You use like the Kubernetes deployment mechanisms or use Argo rollouts for this. At the same time, people are kind of like, I don't want to install an agent, this. And so we also allow you now to do agentless deploys. And that means that we allow you to, in your pipeline definition, monitor certain ports or metrics that are like available, and we can kind of observe. So I think that it's like a balancing act, right? You want integrations for OTel, for example, Open Telemetry. That's a no-brainer. But at the same time, you also want to allow people to kind of customize what they want to observe, because everywhere is different, right? What does it mean, a correct deployment or release? It can be anything, right? A ping to a port or something super complicated, like a synthetic test that you run for days.
Yeah, so is that what CircleCI provides, a sort of overview that wherever separating the deployment side from the test side, from the build side, and sort of having this view, sort of, I think of tentacles, maybe there's a nautical theme, which is always with Kubernetes, of having these tentacles into all your other systems and to find out, where builds are happening, what's going on, do some checking and everything. But all of that sort of getting the software out layer rather than the software running itself. Because obviously if something goes wrong, something needs to kick off a rollback or something and you mentioned Kubernetes, maybe you need to replace the pods, or you need to, blue-green deployments, like all this kind of thing. It gets very complex very soon. So you must have quite a sort of these hooks into all these kind of things to make that a reality.
Yeah, where our value lies is providing the unified orchestrator that allows you to do all these things, from very simple monolithical pipelines, right? And then you can grow into like enterprise scale, where you have like tons of microservices over multiple environments, and you're like chaining all these things, and you're observing open telemetry things and feeding this back into your orchestration engine. And you can have, you have like inner loops, which are close to the code. You want to move as fast as possible. But if you start to move into the release area, you can have like an outer loop that maybe takes hours or days, right? To have like enough traffic to make like an informed decision. So also having these services that are running for hours or days without timing out and keeping track of the performance of what you need to observe. That's the big challenge. So I think from the CircleCI perspective, this orchestration layer, having like a unified, holistic view, single pane of glass kind of thing, and then hooking into all these different observation layers, but also the test frameworks, the build tooling, caching, you name it. And that's kind of where we, I think, can start. We bring the value. And then it's also fine if people write their own logic or script their own pipelines, because the complexity might be too big for our DSL to handle what you want to do. That's totally fine. We still add a lot of value, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned the sort of inner and outer loop, and that sort of makes me think of another tension that developers always have is developers always want to do everything on their laptop, and they want to, do everything, run absolutely everything. They want to recreate all the clouds on their laptop all the same time, and, containers going up and down everywhere. What are your thoughts on how developers should think about that from a CI/CD pipeline? Because, people are going to run some tests locally, or they're going to do something quickly, and then you sort of have this mental model of you send it off remotely to the pipeline, and the pipeline goes and does stuff, and that takes much longer and whatever. So how should developers think about, what they can iterate on quickly on their local machine, and what they put in their pipeline, or is there a blurring and a merging of that process?
Yeah, the same way as that we kind of move in this circle, but it's not a circle, right? I think when we did like a earlier talk, we were talking like if you look at a circle from the top, the circle just goes in circles, right? You only see this single circle. If you like shift perspective, the circle goes up, the complexity kind of increases. So we went from codified pipelines into more like DSL-based pipelines, and now it's like hybrids, but it's like how we use it is becoming more and more complicated and complex. And it's the same, I think, with this area, where first you did it on your machine. At some point it became too hard or too long or too many resources, and the team grew, and then you moved it into the cloud. Let's call it the cloud. And at some point, you now see people like, yeah, but if I run it on my Mac M2 or M4, it's much faster than it's running on like this infrastructure that we run our build infrastructure on. So within CircleCI, obviously we have a huge range of build infrastructure that we basically manage for you. It can be like super large instances, GPUs, M4s, anything, but also very small. So the right sizing is an interesting challenge. Typically, the optimization is not something that people focus on a lot first. It's more like, does it work? And then at some point, it's like, oh, maybe we can right size this a little bit, less memory and more CPU or something else. But we also have like self-managed runners. So basically you can run on your local machine or on your own infrastructure, the build infrastructure, or do hybrids. So you can do certain things on our built infrastructure and some things on your own. And what you see happening is that people start moving these self-managed runners into their own developer machines, basically running the entire pipelines on their own machines. And that's not applicable to all scenarios, but there are lots of dependencies to databases and whatever. It's hard, but you see that move. And also that means that the CLI also becomes more important again. Like it was in the past, you see those and helper tools around it. Like, can I run this pipeline on my local machine just to see if it works? And then everything works as I expect it to work. And so, yeah, again, hybrids, but our challenge is to provide for these different scenarios, right?
Yeah, that sounds super useful because obviously, the speed is of the essence when developers are coding. They're going to try something else. They want their linting and their stuff to happen. They want this, some of their security checking. They want to do this. They want to mock some things and everything. So I think there's always this trade-off between local and remote, and the more remote, sometimes you can do locally and speed it up. Yeah, so it sounds a great sort of flexible way to do it.
Yeah, and also context switching. Yeah. If you're working in your IDE, so we have a VS Code extension, we have integrations like these days we have MCP servers that are kind of like the big hype that you can integrate with Mistral or any of those tools. Yeah, so the better you can reduce context switching and keep people like in the flow, the better, I think.
Of course, we can't earn our money when we're not going to talk about AI, but just before we do that, what are things that people get wrong when they're either building pipelines or shipping software or, setting this all up or thinking about things, CI/CD pipeline, getting things into production? What are the sort of big mistakes you see or obvious mistakes or silly mistakes or whatever kind of mistakes that people do that they can save themselves time and money by, understanding and sorting out?
Yeah. Okay. That's a very interesting one. So like I said, the right sizing is a thing. Yes, we have, for example, a usage API. We have insights dashboards where you can see like how the memory usage, CPU usage, time it takes, whatever. But the usage API allows you to pull like full granularity data from the system that you can kind of parse and drill into. This gives you a ton of information about where to kind of increase, maybe build infrastructure agent or reduce it. So right sizing is definitely a thing where people can gain caching, making smarter use of caching. Also kind of optimizing parallel pipelines, matrix builds. The thing might run. When I started programming, we did like a lot of JMeter based optimization because compute was expensive. It was more expensive than our time. So we kind of like did like stress testing and see where we can kind of shave off a few seconds. And I think this optimization mindset can really be interesting and increase the speed, reduce the cost, because it's obviously there. And we can do better in the information that we provide. And I think that's one of the most interesting things of MCP server, because if you're writing software, you're not daily looking at the new features that we're delivering or the improvements that we're delivering. So if you kind of can ask a system like, where can we optimize without automatically applying it? And the system, there's this new feature that helps you to kind of do this in a better way. There's a bottleneck that we observe. I think that's super interesting. And then what I also see is it's more like a cloud. When cloud started happening, you had this discussion about TCO, total cost of ownership. What does it cost to manage your own infrastructure versus somebody else managing your infrastructure? We see the same thing happening with runners, because self-managed runners, depending on how your organization is structured financially or budget-wise, sometimes people think like, but I'm not paying for infrastructure because that's another department in our company. Yeah. So, if we switch to self-managed runners, it's cheaper because then we don't need to pay for the what we kind of like CircleCI runs these things for us. So we need to pay, obviously. And then we're like, but somebody's managing these things, right?
Somebody's paying, yeah.
Yeah. So we actually see like people kind of backtracking there. So it's first like, yeah, we need to move everything to self-managed warehouse. And it's like, we made the calculations. You're not that expensive, but we kind of do the entire TCO calculation. So again, moving in circles.
Learning things. So the optimization, the cost sort of aspect of it. I mean, any sort of advice in terms of even, building pipelines or defining them? What are the things that would help people with their CI/CD pipelines in the sort of definition and architecture and deciding, how to run their pipelines would be useful?
That's a tricky one. Let me think. Iteration, like having the thing run and look at what it's doing, like the consumption that it's doing, or what the speed that it's taking, and then really trying to dig into the metrics and figuring out where you can like improve how it's working. Yeah, I think that's one of the most obvious low-hanging fruits that people.
So does that help then to have sort of, I'm even thinking from a microservice lens of having, smaller pipelines that, do specific things so they can be more efficient. And so when you're iterating on this new software layer of your pipelines, you're not breaking somebody else's microservice pipeline and you can just iterate on your one.
Yeah, that's a very good one. Like basically slicing it up, strangler pattern, right?
Yeah.
Because what we see in, let's say CircleCI, I think 2011 we started in the CI/CD space. So a long time. Let's say you came into a platform 5-6 years ago. Imagine the complexity of the pipelines that if you kind of grow and grow and grow and more teams are added and more services are added and they're all in one big chunky pipeline, that's super hard to maintain and also to debug, to optimize. So again, the same thing as with software, start strangling it.
Same lessons of software. Yeah. Do you see developers managing their CI/CD pipelines more and more, or is it a sort of platform team component or a bit of a blend?
Yeah, the platform team thing is definitely a theme. That's happening. And obviously it's depending on the scale of the organization. In my mind, 8 out of 10 software developers don't want to be bothered with the ops side of things and it's
the slight fracturing of DevOps where you're like, actually, we don't want to do this. We tried, but we don't want to. It's hard.
Yeah, it's a different mindset. You need to really love that part, and it's all good. With smaller setups, you see like the team owns everything, right? The software and the tests and the pipelines and the infrastructure management around it. And that makes sense. But at some point you scale out, and then you also see this like separation of concerns, because there's like maybe compliancy things or security things. And then it becomes much more sensible to have like standard templates and policies. So we have like the OPA based policy engine that you can apply to your pipelines definitions. And we have overrides that you can kind of apply so you see this like almost like a library or templates that are kind of like managed by a platform team.
Yeah. I think this is super useful, because ultimately when the parallel is just so clear to me of we had taken the same software things we're doing it and then applying it to the pipelines. And so it is a separation of concerns, being nimble, being efficient, doing things in your pipelines, but consciously thinking of your pipeline as software, and it needs to be managed, curated, looked after and loved in a way. Yeah. Otherwise it's going to go wild, and you're going to have, contexts and all the kind of things between different teams, to look after.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same with your front-end developers, back-end developers. Yeah.
But you need to consciously, I think of your CI/CD pipeline as part of your sort of software architecture and deal with it. So we delayed long enough. We've obviously got to talk about the future of AI. You've sprinkled in some MCP acronyms and things in there. Yeah, where do you see the future of this AI-infused world we live in? Be it MCP, definitely agents. More software is being written, more autonomy, and in so many different ways. So I suppose pushing software out, defining pipelines, querying pipelines, doing that observability from natural language. Yeah, what's sort of bubbling up in your mind of the sort of future of this AI-infused CI/CD world?
Yeah, that's a nice one. Obviously, the entire thing with natural language interfaces is a thing, like the vibe coding. I think you get also like the vibe DevOps thing at some point where people say like, just create a pipeline for me that does all these things, and then the pipeline is it. But it's tricky because it's hitting operations, you're hitting productions, because if you build and test and get your stuff into production, you don't want an agent hit production without you kind of being in the loop or being involved. So what I'm seeing, there's a ton of value in the system, basically acting as an expert, like the gray old guy or girl that is kind of like tons of scar tissue and tells you like, yeah, I think you can optimize here and there, and explain you why it's better, and basically helping you to grow in your experience. So it's more like, like I say, like an expert system that's kind of running alongside with you. And obviously you can have like self-healing pipelines or self-optimizing pipelines, and maybe even deciding these pipelines are less critical than this. So that's definitely an area where we're kind of heavily invested in, having the natural language interface plus the expert system running in the background. Also the testing, like prompt evaluations, because they're non-deterministic, they change every time. So you need to kind of like have much smarter ways of determining if the test is successful or not, and you can kind of proceed or not. And there's a ton of data flow through our system that you can get a ton of value out. Like what tests to run based on historical data, why and why not, having explainability, audit logging there. So these areas are definitely stuff that we're kind of diving in very deeply, because CI/CD is our core, right? It's not a thing that we do on the side. It's the only thing that we do.
But even when I think of it, everybody wants to leverage AI, and the industry's figuring out what that means. But ultimately, your CI/CD pipeline and your tests and everything is your protection mechanism to allow your internal people like go wild on AI, build whatever you want, try it out, do all these crazy kind of things, and then have your CI/CD pipeline going, okay, well, now seriously, we're going into production. That's wrong. That breaks policies. That is breaks a guardrail. That's insecure and all this kind of thing. Yeah. So in a way, the better you get at your CI/CD allows you to be more exploratory in your AI, because you've got this backstop, this wise old lady or man at the top going, good idea, but let's iterate on that. And I suppose your AI agent, slow down. And your AI agent can probably read that and go, okay, I went a bit too crazy. Let me reiterate, do another version. And I can see a sort of agentic workflow of in collaboration with your CI/CD system to actually do the right thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting area. I'm super curious to see where this all will go. So
are there things today in the top of mind that we haven't spoken about yet that you're thinking, oh, that's interesting to bring up?
No, not really. I think we encountered a lot of very interesting things. And like the analogy came back a lot of times, like everything that we kind of improved with software development, we also start doing now with CI/CD pipelines. And then I think the same things will happen with what we see with machine learning and AI in software development. We will also see happening in DevOps and CI/CD.
Yeah, and I think for what it's worth, I think the sort of DevOps products and industry and everything I think that it's an exciting time where getting stuff into production is going to become easier, and people are figuring out things, and it's, there's going to be a lot of, I think there's a lot of innovation happening in the sort of deployment and CI/CD space, where people are like, yeah, we did those pipelines ages ago, but I think with everything that's going on at the moment, it's exciting times. So
there will be a new wave, definitely.
Excellent. Well, Olaf, thanks so much for joining us here on GOTO Unscripted. It's great to hear sort of from in the trenches of people who, helping customers and seeing what's going on in the industry. So thanks for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I really enjoyed this talk.
Excellent. And until the next episode of GOTO Unscripted, the GOTO website is fantastic. There are, so many recordings, the audio podcasts as well. There's the GOTO conferences as well, which are always fantastic to attend. So enjoy building software, enjoy getting software into production as well. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the GOTO podcast. Head over to gotopia.tech to discover lots more content from the brightest minds in software development.